Hi, this is Matt Baker. Today I'm going to discuss whether or not Queen Elizabeth has any Black, Jewish, or Muslim ancestors. And by ancestors, I mean known ancestors within the last 1,000 years or so. Because if you go back farther than that, we know from mathematics that everyone in the world eventually ends up being connected to everyone else, even if we don't know exactly how. But in this video, I'm not going to be focusing on the theoretical. I'll be focusing on what we know from the actual genealogical records of European royalty. Now, if we're looking for Black, Jewish, or Muslim individuals in the European royal family tree, the best place to look will be in medieval Iberia, what we now know as Spain and Portugal. This is because medieval Iberia was a very diverse place. For a long time, there were Christian kingdoms that existed alongside Muslim kingdoms, with Jews often living peacefully in both. And being close to North Africa, Iberia was also a place where you could find people from lots of different races and ethnicities. Although I should note that at the time, race was understood very differently than it is today. I know that a lot of people who follow this channel are fans of the computer game Crusader Kings 3. Well, 2 days from now, the makers of CK3 are releasing their latest flavor pack called Fate of Iberia. It centers on many of the exact same historical people and places that I'll be talking about in this video. So if you're interested in diving deeper into this period in a way that's both fun and educational, I suggest that you check out the link to Crusader Kings Fate of Iberia, which you can find in both the video description and pinned comment. I'll be referencing CK3 from time to time throughout this video, as well as using portraits and maps that come directly from the game. Okay, let's start up at the top of the chart with a king named Alfonso the Great from the House of Cantabria. In the year 866, he became the ruler of a small Christian kingdom in the north of Iberia known as the Kingdom of Asturias. However, as you can see here, most of the peninsula at the time was known as Al-Andalus, which is the name that modern historians use when talking about the Muslim-controlled parts of Iberia, which is why the new Crusader Kings flavor pack is called Fate of Iberia. The game starts in the year 867, when the fate of Iberia was truly up for grabs. In real life, Alfonso the Great was able to expand his kingdom, building a new capital at Leon, but his immediate descendants were not able to conquer much new ground, and Al-Andalus ended up experiencing a golden age under the rule of the Caliphate of Cordoba. During this period, the Jews living in Iberia also experienced a golden age, as they mostly lived in the Muslim-controlled areas, and Muslim rulers were generally quite tolerant of Jews. But back to the Christian rulers. Eventually, Alfonso the Great's male line came to an end, and power shifted to the House of Jimena, with the marriage of Sancha of Leon to Ferdinand the Great. Before he died, Ferdinand the Great split his lands between his three sons. Sancho received Castile, Alfonso received Leon, and Garcia received Galicia. If you start Crusader Kings in 1066, you can choose to play any of these three brothers. In real life, the brothers eventually went to war with each other, with Alfonso VI emerging as the victor, claiming the title Emperor of Spain. Which brings us to the first of three women that I'd like to focus on, Zaida of Seville, who was either a wife or lover of Alfonso VI. By the time Alfonso became king, the Caliphate of Cordoba had crumbled and had been replaced by several small independent Muslim states. One of these was Seville, ruled by the Abbadid dynasty. Zaida was either the daughter of Al-Mu'tamid, the Emir of Seville, or more likely, his daughter-in-law, her first husband probably being al-Mu'tamid's son Abu Nasir, who had been put in charge of Cordoba. However, in 1091, the House of Abbadid fell to another Muslim dynasty, the Almoravids. Zaida became a widow at this point and ended up as a refugee in the court of Alfonso VI, where she is then said to have converted to Christianity, taking the name Isabel. Now, the details at this point are a bit fuzzy. About a year or so after Zaida showed up at court, the king's wife, Constance of Burgundy, became ill and died. And shortly thereafter, Alfonso and Zaida had a son together named Sancho. But then the king is said to have married someone named Bertha, followed by someone named Isabel. So it is unclear as to whether Zaida was the Isabel that he officially married, or whether he and Zaida were simply lovers and that there was a second Isabel in his life. What we do know for sure is that Alfonso named Sancho as his heir. His only child that was older was a female named Urraca, but like most monarchs at the time, he wanted a male heir. However, as fate would have it, Sancho died before his father, so Urraca inherited the throne anyway. But several generations later, one of Urraca's descendants, King Peter of Castile, became lovers with one of Sancho's descendants, Maria de Padilla. Together, they had a daughter named Isabella of Castile. And Isabella of Castile is known to be a direct ancestor of Henry VII of England, who is in turn an ancestor of Queen Elizabeth II. Therefore, this means that we can trace a direct bloodline all the way from Queen Elizabeth to Zaida of Seville. And therefore, we can say with confidence that Queen Elizabeth has at least one known Muslim ancestor. Now, several years ago, there was a string of news stories that claimed that Queen Elizabeth is also the direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. Those articles used her connection to Zaida of Seville to build the argument. However, there are two problems with the claim. One is that it requires Zaida to have been the daughter of al-Mu'tamid, which, according to medieval Islamic sources, she was not. According to those sources, she was his daughter-in-law, meaning that we don't actually know who her parents were. Second, it also assumes that the Abbadids were Sayyids, meaning known descendants of Muhammad, but there is some debate over whether or not they actually were. So I don't think we can trace a solid line from the queen to Muhammad, which doesn't actually mean that she isn't his descendant. Like I mentioned earlier, based on mathematics, we know that she probably is, as am I, and probably you too. We just don't know exactly how. Plus, there's not really anything special about being a descendant of a famous ancient or early medieval person. Given enough time, everybody is connected to everybody. If you want to know the details about that, check out our video on why everyone is a descendant of royalty. Okay, the next person I want to talk about is a woman named Madragana, also known as Mor Afonso. She was the lover of King Afonso III of Portugal, a descendant of Urraca. Madragana comes up frequently in discussions about one of her descendants, Queen Charlotte, the wife of King George III of Great Britain. Queen Charlotte is often claimed to have been a black queen. And in fact, in the current hit TV show Bridgerton, she is played by biracial actress Golda Rosheuvel. Now, Bridgerton is not the most historically accurate show, so their choice of actor doesn't really say one thing or another. But let's dive into why so many people think that Queen Charlotte was black. It all comes down to the fact that she descends from Madragana via Madragana's son with the king, who is named Martim Chicoro. Now, according to historical records, Madragana was a Moor, and this is where the confusion sets in. because the word Moor has been used to mean different things in different times and places. Generally speaking, though, the word Moor was usually used to refer to a Muslim person who originated from Northwest Africa and or had dark skin. So the assumption is that Madragana was a dark-skinned person from African descent. However, like I said earlier, in medieval times, race wasn't understood in the same way that it is today. Back then, race was less about the color of one's skin and more about one's cultural identity. And just like today, North Africans, during the Middle Ages, had a wide range of different skin colors. So it's hard to say whether or not Madragana was what we today would call black. But for the sake of argument, let's assume that she was. There are 15 generations between Madragana and Queen Charlotte, which means that during Madragana's lifetime, there were likely at least 10,000 other people walking around who were also the ancestors of Queen Charlotte. So, to put it another way, due to the time distance, the likelihood that Madragana had any measurable impact on the DNA of Queen Charlotte is next to none. But that doesn't take away from the fact that Queen Charlotte does in fact descend from Madragana, and therefore Queen Elizabeth does too, which means that there is a strong possibility that Queen Elizabeth has at least one known black ancestor. Which leaves us with one more question. What about Jewish ancestors? Does she have any of those? Well, I sort of addressed this question in a previous video that I did on British Israelism. British Israelism being the false theory that Western Europeans are the descendants of the lost 10 tribes of Israel, and that Queen Elizabeth sits on the throne of David, being a descendant of a Judean princess that escaped to Ireland around the time that Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians. But, like I said in that video, there is actually no evidence of such a princess, and in all likelihood, the story was made up in the 19th century. But what's interesting is that there is a strong possibility that Queen Elizabeth does in fact have known Jewish ancestors, and that we might even be able to trace her line all the way back to the kings of Judah. Now, let me say up front, though, that this doesn't mean that she is in any way the heir of King David, or that she has any more Jewish blood than the average non-Jew living in Europe today. Once again, let me point out that once we go back any farther than 1,000 years, pretty much everyone in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East connects to everyone else. So there's really nothing special going on here. The only thing that's special is that royals tend to have better records than the average person, and therefore it's easier to find these interesting connections. Let's start with Alfonso XI of Castile, another descendant of Queen Urraca. He was the father of King Peter, as well as Peter's illegitimate half-brother, Henry, who defeated Peter and seized the throne. Well, Henry had a full brother, also illegitimate, named Fadrique, who became the Lord of Haro. He married a woman named Paloma ben Yahia, who was quite likely a Jew. One of their descendants married one of the descendants of King Henry, and together they had King Ferdinand II of Aragon, the famous Catholic king who married Queen Isabella, thus uniting the thrones of Spain. They were also the ones who funded Christopher Columbus and who started the Spanish Inquisition, which, of course, nobody expected. Sadly, they also ended up expelling all of the Jews from Spain. Like I said earlier, in previous centuries, Jews had lived quite peacefully in Spain, particularly in Muslim-controlled areas. It's therefore a bit ironic that Ferdinand kicked them out because Ferdinand himself was quite possibly 1/16 Jewish. Anyway, because the royal families of Europe intermarried so much, Ferdinand II is actually one of the ancestors of George III, and thus also one of the ancestors of Queen Elizabeth. This means that we can trace a direct line from Queen Elizabeth to Paloma ben Yahia. So let me tell you a bit more about the Ben Yahia family. The name comes from Paloma's great-grandfather, Yahia ben Rabbi, who lived in Portugal and was knighted by the king there, receiving land as well. Yahya was in turn the grandson of Hiya al-Dawdi, a famous poet whose hymns are still used by Sephardic Jews today. Sephardic Jews being Jews that trace their roots to Spain or Portugal, in contrast to Ashkenazi Jews who trace their roots to Germany or Eastern Europe. Hiya al-Dawdi was actually born near Baghdad and was the first person from the family to immigrate to Iberia. In fact, in Baghdad, his family were considered to be part of the House of Exilarchs, who traced their descent all the way back to the kings of Judah, and who were spiritual leaders in the Babylonian Talmudic Academy during the Geonim period. So there you have it. Queen Elizabeth definitely has at least one known Muslim ancestor, maybe one known black ancestor, and probably one known Jewish ancestor. And all three of these ancestors lived in medieval Iberia, one of the most religiously and ethnically diverse places in Europe at the time. As I mentioned earlier, if you want to immerse yourself in this incredible time period, I recommend that you download Fate of Iberia, the latest add-on to the game Crusader Kings 3. You can do so by following the link in the description or pinned comment. Thanks for watching.